Welcome to Close Listening. I'm Zach Morgenstern, joined as always by silent co-host Ludwig von V. One thing I've been doing recently is going through every single Bob Dylan studio album, reviewing them in order. Another thing I did recently was post a review of one of my favorite Christmas albums, a compilation of some Elvis Presley Christmas music. That Elvis Presley cassette is really dear to my heart. Now, the reason I did that one somewhat recently is that Christmas was not that long ago. However, now I'm recording this in March. By the time this video goes live on YouTube, it may very well be spring. It feels kind of silly to do a Christmas review. Nonetheless, I am doing all the Bob Dylan albums in order, and it so happens that the next one is Christmas in the Heart. This was released as a charity record with the proceeds going to the hunger organization Feeding America. And, instantly something like this strikes people as ironic. Sure, a lot of famous musicians do Christmas albums, but surely someone as great a poet who takes himself as seriously as Bob Dylan would never do something like this. Now, the problem with Bob Dylan is it's hard to know exactly what his relationship is to pretentiousness, to self-image, to not doing things like Christmas albums. So should one interpret there as being irony here? How much irony? It's kind of hard to say. Bob Dylan seemed to insist when he did interviews about this that people who thought he could only do something like this, ironically, really didn't understand him. One thing I'll say is it's hard not to have the sense that Bob Dylan has, throughout his career, rejected the image people had of him. I have some sense that the distance between people's image of him and his understanding of himself
grew far wider
as the years went by. So one of the notable features of the early Bob Dylan records is he'd often come into a studio and record things and be done with them. This was quite inconvenient for the sound engineers. Nashville Skyline, I think, was originally supposed to be like an album of all duets with him and Johnny Cash, and that basically didn't work out because Bob Dylan didn't give them enough audio material to mix his and Johnny Cash's voices together. Whereas apparently with Christmas in the Heart, as part of the recording process, all these musicians took really seriously listening to the classic versions of these Christmas carols and thinking, how can we honor the originals and also make little musical choices to make them our own? And honestly, the thing with this record, on the one hand, it comes across as a serious Christmas album with mostly fairly standard choices. On the other hand, something just still works about Bob Dylan doing a Christmas album that makes this one all the more fun. One of the great songs on here is the first track, the singing cowboy, Gene Autry's "Here Comes Santa Claus." So Bob's voice at this stage in his life, it's always has this bluesy, gritty, gruff edge to it. And while he has used that to record a lot of blues music from the 90s onwards, here there's a really unique effect because the musicians are not playing in a gritty bluesy style. The music is very smooth and clean, and there's even very clean backup singers in the background. Here comes Santa Claus, here comes Santa Claus. And yet Bob Dylan comes on with his gruff voice. And the context, it sheds a new light on Bob Dylan's gruff voice. Suddenly it doesn't sound so gruff. Suddenly it sounds kind of like Burl Ives singing in Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. He's more like a loving grandpa figure than a grumpy curmudgeon-y blues man. Track number 2 is Do You Hear What I Hear? This is like a weird Christmas song in general because it doesn't sound straightforwardly joyous. It's more like people in a kind of melancholy position gradually becoming joyful as they accept the miracle of Jesus, I guess. And this effect is made most interesting by Bob Dylan's voice. He struggles to hit some of the notes. I don't know if it's naturally or on purpose here when he goes, a star, like it's kind of off key. But that gives the impression that he's not just a singer singing the song, but he's a character in this world actually being enchanted in the moment. Maybe he can't sing beautifully, but he's just singing spontaneously, and I kind of love it. Track number 3 is Winter Wonderland. At this point, the novelty is starting to wear off, but one of the things I really noticed with the song is how Bob Dylan finds all these unique ways to enunciate his lyrics. I heard an interview with Idina Menzel about her singing in Frozen 2. How she says when she does her singing, she like writes out a map of the song. Now, for her, that makes sense. She has this epic, swooping Broadway voice, and I guess you have to plan your breathing to know when you can belt and when you cannot. But I kind of get the impression listening to this collection that maybe Bob Dylan does that kind of thing too. He really thinks through a song and says, I'll change the rhythm a bit here, or I'll change my enunciation a bit here. There's some really fun choices. When your nose gets a chin, He makes lyrics that sound kind of plain in the original have some real personality. Next, we get Hark the Herald Angels Sing. This is a song I really only know from the Charlie Brown Christmas special. And there's something really special about hearing it in Bob Dylan's, again, gravelly voice. It sounds like a desperate drunkard having a Christmas miracle moment, rumbling out with his little Christmas prayer. Next, we get the song I'll Be Home for Christmas. This one for me is the definition of bland Christmas songs. I don't care, it's even when Elvis Presley sings it, but just to hear it in Bob Dylan's voice, it adds a layer of desperation. It brings the song to life. Now, I don't know if Bob Dylan can save the little drummer boy. Look, obviously, I'm not Christian. I experience Christmas as solely the Santa Claus part of the holiday and not the religious part of the holiday. So it's hard for me to connect with this one and the parapapum pum. I don't know. It just doesn't sound like good music to me. It's the definition of corny Christmas music. And if any song on this CD is an indication that Bob Dylan is doing this sincerely, it's this one because, yeah, this is the one where his delivery just he most sticks to the original song. And I guess Bob Dylan just really likes Christmas music. Track number 7 is called Christmas Blues. I briefly wondered if this was an original song, but it's not. But yeah, this is the only one that isn't a very common Christmas song, at least in my experience. I guess this was a chance to add more of a Dylan-esque song here. But to be honest, it doesn't sound like the blues from some of his other 2000s albums. It has more of a whiskey bar, blues, jazz, fusion kind of thing because of the emphasis on the piano in it. Next, we get "O Come All Ye Faithful." However, Bob Dylan starts it by singing the Latin version. I find this really entertaining. I assume Dylan doesn't speak Latin, as most modern people do not. And while his diction is interesting on all the songs, him sort of struggling to pronounce and sing these Latin words melodically makes the song sound more distinct than a Bob Dylan version of it already would. Next, we get "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas." And again, we just have some fascinating diction choices. For the most part, this sounds like the standard old song, but sometimes Bob Dylan comes on with the intensity where it momentarily sounds like it's a hard rocker. And then it goes back to being mellow, Merry Little Christmas. Next, we get the highlight of this album, the one that produced a music video. And this is Bob Dylan's version of Must Be Santa. And look, you can't, I wouldn't say this is a grand departure from the original, but this is the one where Bob Dylan and the team are having the most fun, where they're not just straightforwardly trying to create traditional Christmas music. This one is played as a polka, the accordion is really upbeat. And unlike on the other songs where the backup singers really contrast with Bob Dylan, they sound like a sort of standard Christmas choir. On this one, the backup singers are having as much fun as Bob is. Now, of course, Bob doesn't let on that he's having fun because his voice is all gruff and rambly, but you can tell that he's smiling below the gruff exterior. And the music video really captures the energy of the song as a drunken, chaotic party where people are somehow singing a Christmas carol. To close off the album, we get Silver Bells, The First Noel, Christmas Island, the Christmas song, O Little Town of Bethlehem. And, I've basically said what's to be said about these songs. I think the dynamics on Silver Bells make it sound interesting. There's a real oomph in the piano, some crescendos in the percussion, and "A Little Town of Bethlehem" is a great little gravelly delivery. With the Christmas song, he includes the little introduction. There are some jazz songs that sometimes have this little introductory verse that doesn't sound like any of the other verses, and sometimes they don't. So never heard that version of the Christmas song. But this is a fun little novelty. I would definitely bring out this record at Christmas and listening to it in March. And in fairness, I got to play it on my portable CD player while I was walking through snowstorms. So it was still kind of a fit. But yeah, I feel like the novelty of this makes these songs, especially Must Be Santa, kind of fun to listen to any time of the year. I'm Zach Morgenstern. This is Ludwig von B. See you next time.